Okay, so thank you for being on time. We have this space now. Welcome to this Culture of Social Innovation workshop. My name is Juan Cifuentes. I am from the Covadili group, from the Project M. And now I have one of the big ones here, Maria Jose Gretoni. Thank you very much, Majo, for being here. I'm really happy to share the space with you. This will be a very dynamic space. What we want is for all of the involved to learn about what social innovation is, how can we pilot many of those ideas that we might have around social innovation. So let's get started. We will talk about some questions with Majo and take it away, Majo, to get started with this. Thank you very much, Juan. Well, as Camilo was saying, we do have a plan for this, but since this session is about innovation, we are very willing to drop the plan and just see where the conversation takes us. So, if you have any questions during the session, please just write them on the chat and we can address those questions so that this might become a conversation. One second, that I will now share my screen. Okay, so this is us from the Covadili group. And before getting started, just let me tell you a little bit about what Cubadili is. We are a social organization that accompanies other social organizations and governments in terms of social innovation. When we talk about transformation, this is something that is very linked with innovation. This allows for organizations to become more resilient. Cubadili actually means transformation or change in Swahili. We are an organization that works in Argentina. We're based in Argentina, rather, but we worked with many projects around the world. Let me talk about some of the lines of action that we use and why this discussion is at the heart of what, at the core of what we do. So, as part of Cubadili, people that are part of this team have a specific expertise around being agile. And this word, agile, is something that has a lot of impact, or is a buzzword in the technology world. And now it's actually coming to the public sector. And with a little less impact in the social environment or social areas. This, as I was saying, is the expertise of the team in Cubadili. We know a lot about innovation and technology, and with that expertise in mind, that's how we have created this framework. The first one has to do with the design of products and services. We help organizations to be able to develop products and services that can be monetized, but also we help them to understand how to create valuable products or projects. The second action line that we have here are the Civic Innovation Labs. And these are requests that come generally from the public sector that try to address citizens' issues. Now, the sustainability model is very linked to the first one. What we are trying to do here is to facilitate points or places or spaces where we can meet and generate collaboration. And the last one, which is the culture of work, which is what we have been talking about during this session and what we will talk about today in this presentation, the culture of innovation, the culture of continuous improvement and work. So this is just a very general background and context so that you know where we're coming from and what our roadmap looks like. Let's start with the first question that we usually ask the organizations that we work with. Many of these organizations come to us with these ideas of we want to be innovative. We have all of these ideas around technology and products and services. And the first question we ask is, where do you want to be in terms of innovation and predictability? When we ask this question, they are, oh, we want to go 100% innovation. And when we start working, the, we see this pattern of organizations trying to actually know where they're going. So maybe plan A goes from 6 months to a year, and they don't want to lose track of that. And it's not that we are against plans or planning, but we do think that once we realize that the reality is providing different answers to our plans, what do we do? That's the question. How can we adapt to those changes? So when we started working on this, we realized that many of the organizations are actually on the side of predictability than innovation, right? So a little bit of what this talk will be about is a methodology that we have developed of what are innovative methods. However, before that, let's pause for a moment to talk about culture. The title of this chat is Culture of Social Innovation. So let's take a moment to talk about what do we understand by culture. If there's anyone on the chat that would like to add a comment, or I mean, you don't have to go to the chat, just think about it. What does culture mean to you? How would you define the culture of the organization? And if you wanted to make a change in your organization, how would you go about it? Normally, what happens is when you think about changing the organization's culture, normally we think, okay, let's start with the infrastructure, perhaps, or how do we organize ourselves? And a good metaphor for this, when we think about culture, let's say that culture is the shadow. Let's imagine that I have a light uh, on top of me, and when you project light in a certain direction, it creates a shade, right? It creates a certain shadow. So how do you change that shade's direction or projection? And usually this has to do with the organizational structure. And in many of the social organizations, we realized that they have not changed the way they organize or they structure their own organization. We see many of these organizations that are quite hierarchical, very horizontal, I mean, very vertical. And at the end of the day, the final user is left at the end. So some of the things that we do with this type of organizations is a discussion around what the organizational culture is and means. We will not go into depth on this, but of course you will have access to these slides so that you can look at them later on of what the lean and agile leadership looks like. And we define, for example, here what is done and how it should be done. So let's say that the leader or the boss defines what and how, they provide instructions, they have a short term thinking in general, and they have a focus on specialization. When we go down the ladder, you find the team. The team is the arm that executes the plans. They are specialized in their own tasks and they work in silos. So you have, for example, project specialists, institutional specialists, etc., etc. So a good question here is how do we flip that pyramid around? And we give the leadership to the team. What would giving the leadership to the team look like so that they are all the main protagonists of the action? So that these leaders inside the teams are more autonomous, are more dedicated, they are multidisciplinary, and they are specialized in the needs that are identified. And this part, the needs that are identified, has to do with the next slide. So when we flip the pyramid around, we see that the team is the closest element to the final user. So the idea here is to place the needs that we see on the field, let's say on the users, at the forefront of the strategy. And the idea here is that that leader, that boss at the end, um, devotes his time and energy in trying to remove roadblocks. How can he make sure that there are no obstacles in the way? The leader identifies bottlenecks, they mentor, they coach, they help people grow. And the idea is for the leader to take a more long term thinking in mind. Now, this is a combination of both slides. And you will see that many of the things that we will talk about right now are geared towards the final user or the recipient, if you will. Recipients are the people that we want to reach, our target audience in a way. So most of the organizations are structured in this way, in this pyramid, a traditional pyramid. There we have the bosses or the directors taking decisions on the top-down approach. When we try to find this type of change or innovative change, we're just flipping the system around. We are having the recipients at the top. And from there, I gather lessons learned and I start changing what my organization can offer. This is more related to culture, but I didn't want to leave this aside. We will not go into this in depth, but I wanted for you to understand this concept before getting into this organization models. Once we do that, we try to help organizations understand what type of organizations they actually are. Some organizations try to flip the pyramid around. Some of them want to be more horizontal in structure. Some of them want to be more traditional. And when we go now to what you have probably already heard during this event, which is the VICA model. In English is WUCA or VICA in Spanish. And this basically means that this model is applied in a very complex, volatile, ambiguous, and uncertain world. What does this mean? Well, this means that a changing environment, a changing context, and even a rapidly changing context, sometimes due to technology, make social organizations um, have a hard time to respond to the changing, volatile, uncertain environments. When we talk about uncertainty, I like to organize these concepts in this graph. When people start a new project, we need to know where we are. Some of us have a specific level of certainty of where we are. At least in administrative matters, we know what has to be done and how to do it. But with social issues, with social problems, when we talk about much more complex issues, these are issues that we know less and less the what. We know very little of what that problem that needs a solution is, because we need to mix those problems or to place those problems with other very complex issues. So since we do not know what has to be done, we don't know how the answer should be implemented. When we talk about being agile, we need to understand how to be agile in a complex environment. what we do there is we inspect, execute, and adapt. This is basically the logic behind the operation of these contexts. And organizations mostly don't know how to organize themselves around this because it's very difficult to adapt and organize. This is a really good slide because the context of COVID is quite interesting, right? We have been talking about how changes happen quickly. Sometimes you were used to doing things one way and everything changed overnight and then you have to adapt. And in general, it's very hard to see how. And now with the pandemic is more evident now that actually we need to just change by means of force, right? We have to find a way to make this work out of necessity. Yeah, in this point about complex issues or these big challenges that test the strength of organizations, we need to try to understand what are the different styles of culture of organizations. What is going to make the difference here is who is actually going to come in and solve the problems. These things are quite complex, and complex problems are normally out of the hands of authorities. So, leaders that have the know how of how to change and mobilize people and adapt to this changing context are the ones who actually provide solutions to these problems. And this is in the line of the social innovation spirit. And if we go to the core of the issue, we realize that the thing here is to develop products and services that can actually meet that need. But not only that, but actually meet a need that lasts in time. That would be the secret component of all of this. We now see organizations that work around development, humanitarian issues, and all of the groups around migrants. These challenges are not challenges that authorities can necessarily solve. For example, a firefighter can put off a fire with water, but a government cannot just do something that simple or straightforward to a social problem because, for example, a pandemic was something that we have never seen in our lifetime. So a person or an organization that has an innovation culture can actually adapt to this type of contexts. Thank you very much, Camilo. And it's also important to think what things actually last in time or stand the test of time and which ones don't. Sometimes you realize that the things that you have been doing do not really add that much value. And sometimes we just need to be brave enough to bury certain things and practices that we used to do. This is a description of what complex, or as we call them, wicked problems are. This comes from the world of design. And today we will talk about one of the methodologies to provide answers and to provide a response to problems like this. And this is design thinking. And this is the most theoretical way of doing this. I think I wanted to say something else about this. So, Camila, you were talking about users, right? How can we make sure that the user is at the center of our strategy? Yeah, that's true. And I think that if we want to find the solution to refugee and migrant problems, we need to start talking to them, not talk of them, not talk about them. We need to talk to them. And that is a big part of what the solution, where the solution lies. All right, let's talk about design thinking. Design thinking is a methodology that perhaps many of you have heard of. If you know about design thinking, please let us know. And I'll give you a very general overview because there are several methodologies around the agile world. And we chose this one because the culture of innovation is a very, very wide issue. However, design thinking is a methodology that we use to create products and services, to generate campaigns that have impact, and to develop solutions to complex problems. So we really think that design thinking is a methodology that we will share now with you, at least some steps so that you can start testing it. This methodology has 5 steps. And the key here is divergence, convergence, divergence and convergence. This happens in organizations all the time. And you can see this actually happening when people start talking about a problem, we diverge, right? And it's quite hard to converge. So it's important to put on your observation glasses to see how the dynamics of meetings usually occur. So this opening and closing phenomenon around conversations happen a lot. And there are 2 sides to this. The first one has to do with empathy. As I was saying, this has to do with placing the user at the center. And there is a tool that I really enjoy, which is how are we going to create this proto user? Who is this person? What do they think? What do they dream? What do they eat? What do they say they do? What do they really do? You can play with those questions. But the most interesting here is opening the possibilities of who are your end users. It's never really one. And that's where the issue lies. Because when we provide a service, it's open to everyone, really. But from those people that you're offering the service, what is the 20% of that population that really represents the 80% of the added value that you provide? So from that population that you serve, what is the 20% that most use your services? You can think about that in frequency of use as well. But any activity that you need a solution for, you will find several stakeholders and people involved. And my recommendation is to prioritize this because the perspective of a migrant and a refugee is different to someone that knows about that, but it's not one, right? So you have this variety of people, and you have to ask these questions. You can add questions to this as well. And this is a very concrete example of an organization we were working with. This is a type of proto person. For example, we have these demographic data, behaviors. I think this was a donation campaign. And with that person in mind, usually I even want to make like a photo or some sort of image of what this person is, and we start thinking of what's about to come or happen. The second part is how might we, is when we ask the question, how might we? If you want to learn more about this or read about it, just Google or try to find information about this question, how might we? So this question of how might we is right here. This is a key moment of this methodology related to design thinking. because at this point is where we start filtering things out. Usually what happens is we start from an original problem and we turn it into an opportunity. So the idea is to imagine what is the type of question you need. So in this case, for example, the original problem is that staff does not receive expenses reports on time. How can we make this into an opportunity? When we try to turn something into an opportunity, we start thinking about solutions. What happens in meetings usually is that we just think of the solution immediately. So if we say, okay, the problem is this, and people start saying, well, we could do this or we could do that, and this conversation just floats around. But sometimes it's actually useful to calibrate the type of questions we're asking about the problem. So, for example, we could ask, how might we make people to submit their expenses reports on time? So this was a problem. We're changing the question. How might we make people to report their expenses on time? If we made this even more narrow, we can think, how can we use a mobile app to increase or to accelerate expenses reports? So this is something that we don't want to happen because we would narrow, right? We would narrow the possibilities too much. Another type of questions that are quite wide or open would be, what can we do for people to respect more their delivery times or the deadlines? This is a very open question. And perhaps a more just or pertinent question would be, how can we simplify the process so that people can actually deliver the reports as fast as possible? That's one of those questions. Those who are facilitating the process ask these questions and take record of the reports or the answers. I believe that to be able to know how to calibrate those questions or to know which ones are more valuable, we need some experience. But of course, there's always a first time, and we should get started with this. So we have the HMW model. This is this centered in humans? Is it centered in what humans want to achieve, or the organization or the government want to achieve? Is this wide enough so that there's a big range of solutions, or is it even um, narrow enough to provide actually useful limits? The important thing here is to ask just questions in order to break away from the empty or blank page. That's what these questions allow us to do. And of course, to have a sense of possibility, because if the question is leaving out the possibilities of what we can do, that might make it hard for the team to actually get inspired or do anything around it. Okay, so Camilo, would you like to add something? No, let's get started. Let's continue.
Okay, then in this moment that we have the question, we can start working with the idea, the divergence of the methodology. So I wanted to leave an exercise for you. We won't have time to do it today, but I love to do this with my teams because they really realize the value of teamwork and having collective ideas. Usually what we do is having this exercise when we facilitate sessions to find solutions to different problems. And the objective is to prove the value of collective intelligence. So what we ask them to do is to grab a piece of paper and fold it into two and then design 3 different spaces like this. And they have 6 squares, or they can draw a line in the middle and then dividing 2 different columns. And the idea is for each person to draw 6 different trees and share them with the group. What's interesting there is that this is a simple common exercise. It's just drawing a tree, right? But we can have so many different variations. I mean, we could give hundreds of examples, but that's where we really see the richness on each one of us and how everybody has different ideas. So I leave it at that. This is a very powerful exercise. It would generate a pretty good vibe in the environment. So for this type of methodologies, the type of environment that is achieved is very important, because that will open up for new opportunities, new ideas, and it is really amazing. Actually, there was a time where we went to the office and have a small drink, maybe a beer, to relax yourself and think about different stuff, specifically in this type of methodology that we're trying to look for different methodologies. So just leave it at that. And now for the ideation, what we really usually do is to set out rules, which is very important, because these are some examples. Of course, you can look for different rules, but for us, these ones were great and usually are used all the time, having one conversation at a time. If we have 25 in a team, we can organize, I don't know, 3 or 4 groups, but it's important for everybody to listen, not only to speak. Don't make any judgments, and that's very important, because usually one of the rules that we can use is that you cannot say no or but or however, but yes. And like saying, yes, I like that, but I would like to add this or this other aspect. Just building upon what the other is saying, supporting crazy idea, having a flow on a topic, building phrases, being visual, which is very important usually with brainstorming, which is important, especially in terms of the amount of ideas that I raised, and building on other ideas. So prioritizing quality over quantity, because many times at the beginning, we always see the ideas that are already there we have already discussed, and they're very popular. But in the third or fourth idea, that's where we see something interesting and different. Go ahead, Juan. Yes, just wanted to say 2 things in these design thinking spaces. I personally have always loved supporting crazy ideas. They can be very revealing. There are people that sometimes they don't want to share these possible solutions to the problem because they're scared or they're shy. They believe that someone will criticize their ideas. So it's important to know that innovation won't come from typical regular stuff that we see every day. I mean, there is nothing that we use nowadays as innovative tools that was created for one single idea. The IBM CEO said that the only way of achieving growth is by multiplying our and criticizing our mistakes, just multiplying prototypes and using that formula to get that single revolutionary idea. And crazy ideas usually provoke that. So in these rules that we have, I love that one. And also to have the biggest amount of ideas, quantity of ideas, so we can know where to start. because there are some ideas that can be also useful for different problems. So it's creating a range of possibilities. I completely agree, Camilo. And I had an image here for you. There's ideas that you can use or not, just working with this design thinking methodology for campaigns. There was a place we got together and we wrote down a sort of manifest stating the rules. And we had a huge sign or poster placed in the wall. There was a day that the teams used to create solutions and bring ideas to the table. And there's something about the space and what we create, even online. We still have great ideas. So it's good to have this visible when we're working. So that's just one of the ideas. Something that is very important when we are going through this first stage has to do with creating empathy with the others. Once we understand the user or the customer or whomever we want to reach, maybe go out and interview how to go deeper. So this is an exercise that is great, and you can do it with your teams just to practice active listening, empathy, a connection with the others. You can try this out. If you have immigrants, you can also make this test and of interviewing someone. I mean, you may say we always are interviewing, but just exercising active listening and writing down some notes, asking maybe the technique of the 5 Ws or 5 Ys. In this specific case, this exercise has to do, if you want to try out this technique in your organization, you have to interview someone and see how they get to work every day. So it's a simple interview. They might say, well, I take a bus. And why? Well, because the bus would get me, I don't know, 6 blocks away from the work, for the office. And why? Well, because that's the tour. And why? And that's how you interview someone. And let's say climbing a stair to learn why a person does what he does. Also, to draw a sequence, this helps a lot and works a lot with this type of questions. Also, drawing like the road or the way that they have to go through. Maybe the person will have to draw a map, and you can ask it, what happens here? So that would be great. And the other one is a mental map that you already know how it works. So this exercise really helps us in training with empathy, active listening, and really go deep. Once you finish with this interview, this is an exercise that would last maybe 10 or 15 minutes. You can summarize the 3 unique aspects of this person or 3 needs, and then you have a map ready to start making solutions. So once you have all these ideas about how to improve, sorry, I just realized that there's something that I missed mentioning. The idea in this piece of paper is to draw 6 ideas of how to improve the transit for this person. You can say, I thought about this, and the other guy could answer, well, I like this, or I don't like this. I mean, it's interesting because it's something simple, just going to work, but makes people really realize the opportunities they have to make things better, to change something, and also having a lot of input to the solutions that we suggested or feedback. So that was the exercise that I wanted to share with you. And we can go back to this that we were just discussing about brainstorming. This is a very well-known technique. I'm sure that you have heard a lot about this. And it has to do with coming up with a lot of ideas, as we just said with Camilo. But within this brainstorming, there are a lot of sub techniques that could be important. So you can Google brainstorming techniques and you can learn more about that. And I wanted to mention this premises for the creative process. We are moving a little bit away from this technique, but I thought that this was important to mention so you can have this in your mind when you are doing these activities. You have to be focused on human values, being an empathic person, as we mentioned before, and also concentrating in feedback the user or the person can provide to us, because many times we think in desktop exercises like we're going to do this or that, and we never ask like or really test it, or maybe having an experiment, because if you are basing your hypothesis in certain exercise, you can suggest the idea and see what the others have to say. Now, don't say it, show it. This has to do with the prototype cultures. That has to do with the idea that you have, maybe making it more materialized or accessible to the person in front of you. Here we have an example that I really like and has to do with these desk exercises. Think about a desk or a table. Imagine what table, what's the material that is made of, how many people can sit in this table, how high it is, where is it located. Have you already thought about a table? Cami, you have your table? Great. Well, let's think about the others. Maybe they can write down in the chat what the tables look like. Can you, Cami, tell me about your table? Well, I thought about a wooden round table, comfortable for work. Great. And let me tell you why. It's round because of hierarchy. I was thinking about having a better workflow without any hierarchy, just connecting everybody in the same level. Okay, well, I can leave that question there so you can do this exercise with your teams. I thought about a low table, maybe for two people, maybe metal, white. So they have a table that is expandable, that it can be adapted to different sizes. So that's an innovative table. And there is a wooden table and simple table. I mean, this is an exercise that shows us that we are just thinking about a simple table and we see a wider range of options. So think about now of something more complicated that we're trying to get a solution for. And if we don't know what the solution is or how we are going to build it, it's very important to really illustrate or making these ideas visual so we can approach or getting closer to the real sense, because we can have different ideas. It might seem like we are talking about the same table, but different people think about different types of tables, like a round table or a big table or a small table. Radical collaboration. This has to do not only with this technique, but everything in terms of collaboration for this world. This is something key and very important. In this case, it also has to do with having a diverse team with different ideas, points of view. And well, that will make our idea more powerful. Be aware of the process, which has to do with, for example, this methodology has this double diamond methodology or divergence and convergence. It's important to have a facilitator, someone in the team who knows what happens in different phases and what's the output of these phases. Prototype culture, I already described this one. Insight into action, please don't be confused with the name. This has to do with sometimes just staying in speeches and not being active or not conducting any action. So this has to do with what we have to do, not about having a meeting with some ideas. If we think about something, we have to set it up and validate it out there. And we are here now. We finished with the ideation aspect of it. So we already talked about criteria for creativity, and now we can go into the prototype. For this technique or methodology in design thinking, what's important is that it doesn't matter how many materials you have. Maybe you just have to make a drawing with your hand, with your pencil and a piece of paper. Sometimes we complicate things more than that is necessary. What's important in this stage is to make it accessible for other people. And we can move forward with the final phase, which is testing. This is an important stage. Sorry, this is too long. But has to do with experimenting or making experiments. So once we define what we're going to do, etc., we have to know how are we going to validate the ideas that we have. So this is a card to making experiments, creating hypotheses, and go back to the path, how to improve the transportation of one person that is traveling to his or her work. She or he can do this or that. And it's important to know how I'm going to measure this, because if we do something and if we have a different result to what was expected and we didn't know how we were going to measure it, we usually adapt the measure to just to confirm our idea. So it's important to define before the experiment how we're going to measure it. I just wanted to talk up a little bit about measurement or metrics, because everything that refers to social organizations or social enterprises, one of the reasons why we never see a wake out or a big jump to where we're trying to go is because leaders are not willing to value their programs and measuring them in detail. So when the leader has to talk about design thinking, brainstorming, product discovery, any activity that you have, if you cannot measure it, you won't have a positive effect. And it's one of the causes why we don't have a quantic leap. And maybe we can spend 1, 10, or 20 years doing the same thing because we don't know what's happening. So in this case, I thought it important to mention that. Great. Thank you. Let me share my screen again. So we are in the final part of testing. During or throughout this process, what is happening here is that we're working with what we call insights. Let me go back to the slide to think about this. So usually we observe, we understand, and we are always sort of jumping, saying, well, I have all of this, I have my hypothesis, I generate an insight, and I can suggest possible solutions. And this is the design thinking topic that we wanted to share with you today. I don't know if someone wants to tell a little bit about why you think this could be useful for your organization in your everyday lives. I think it would be valuable for you to share with us, because I think that these conversations are useful if we can apply something. Otherwise, we have all this information that is available. We are always consuming information. And at the end of the day, this type of methodologies are only useful if taken to action. Otherwise, it's just raising ideas. So if you want to write down on the chat or tell us a little bit about that. Otherwise, I have some final thoughts that could be useful. But if anybody has a question or a comment, we're open. Thank you. So these are final tips that have to do not only with the design thinking aspect of it, but also with the innovation culture, agility and innovation. One thing that is clear when we work in complex issues is to divide it into small pieces, or maybe summarize it a little. So usually we face a huge problem and I have to divide it into little sections. We talked about working with post-its, with murals, or different tools that allows us to think and visualize information to really manage the big problem and make priorities to look for solution. So collaborate and visualizing, we already mentioned this and has to do with that, to collaborate with shareholders in the process, maybe having in the core of the process and not just lost in the chain. Also, launching rapid solutions and continuous comments has to do with what Camilo was saying, being able to do something and see if it works or not. And if it doesn't work, it's okay. I didn't lose time or energy. That's okay. Just let it go. That's just a mental frame, a way of being or living for your own lives even. And also to create or conduct several iterations that has to do with short work cycles or improvement cycles. When we're talking about iterations, is okay, I thought about one solution, I executed, and I check if it worked or not. And if it didn't, I create another cycle, adding something that I learned from the first one. So we have to learn at all times. And also, I'm thinking that in agility, we always think of 4 key actions that teams will have to bear in mind. First is collaboration. We always have to work in teams. That's why it's very important to work in silos, because usually if I'm just concentrating in one thing, it doesn't matter to me what's happening around me. So sometimes when we think about broader solutions, they are more powerful. Number 2 has to do with delivery. Making frequent deliveries in small packages to be able to learn from them. Number 3 has to do with reflecting or thinking about it, which doesn't happen a lot either. Just stop the game and thinking instead of just doing and doing and doing. Just stop for a second. In Cubadili, for example, we work for 2 weeks and then we stop. We have an analysis. We ask questions, see the different perspectives of the team. We see what it works, what it didn't, and we do that every 2 weeks. We check it if we deliver something or not, and that would add more value to continuous deliveries and also improvement, which is very important for everything that we do. For example, the improvement cycle for Kubadili is every 2 weeks. Every 2 weeks, we have to stop, reflect on what we did, and then change whatever we need to. For this type of methodologies, such as design thinking, that's key. Design thinking can be done in a short amount of time, but it's important to set out a time frame to do these experiments. So, Gami, I don't know, you have any question or something to add? No, maybe asking the audience of what questions they have with these dynamic tools. Maybe Alma, Cuxabel, or any other person who wants to write something in the chat, that would be great. And well, at the end of the day, this type of spaces, what they look for is to think outside the box, going beyond what we are used to. And sometimes this turns out to be more productive than what we thought. There are people that think that this is very necessary for different organizations. I mean, we were evolving pretty rapidly in the last few years, but in the following, this will be increasingly fast because of COVID. So we are going to change gears, and we have to change differently and act differently. And what I really love about this is the team cohesion, what it generates in the team. They're not your task or my task. It's just a collective effort. And at the end of the day, this is one of the greatest added value here in innovation. I mean, when we work together, we cannot have people thinking in innovation and others who are thinking of something else. So we really want everybody to innovate in how we work. So for that, for me, that's really good to generate a thought and to implement this in the teams and go deeper. There's a lot of information about this on the web. Yes, I wanted to add something with what we said to Deb. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing it, but it has to do with changing, renovating in the inside and in the outside. So it has to do with what we have in the inside and to be able to renew yourself. Because sometimes we show a lot of innovation outside, but it's very difficult. This is a reflection of who I am, the entity or identity of the culture or organization. So it's very difficult to have innovations with a structure that does not boost innovation, or with a culture that would not allow for this. And that's something that is shared in different organizations. So this is a topic that we really love. And we could continue talking about this whenever you want. We are always available. Okay, thank you. Thank you for your time. I think that everybody lives very happy. And we are going to practice all of these learning experiences. Thank you for everybody who participated in this project. This is a project that has a lot of heart. And we have a lot of things to give in the next few months. We have many interesting process with Cuba and the team. So we know that this is priceless for the whole community. So thank you for being here, and continue enjoying. Thank you, and thank you, Hib, for the invitation. Thank you.